Hey, Mike.
Hey, Ethan.
We're back because
we're after much ado.
Everybody, Orthodoxy.
Something no.
Oh, everybody, get Orthodox tonight.
The Chesterton boy band. I love it.
Yeah. I was going for the Backstreet Boys. They kind of sing gibberish right here.
Just like every boy band ever. It's not about the words, it's about the haircut, man.
Yeah.
Back again.
I'm using new software.
That's awesome.
You're listening to another episode of Chesterton's Gateway with Ethan, Nicolle, and Michael Grumbine, and me, AI Chesterton. Buckle your Chester belts, boys. It's time to go full Orthodox.
That's right. We're diving in.
If you're Orthodox, let me hear you yell that you got on your Chester belt.
That's right.
I'm a Chesterton.
The lyrics to your songs are like a mine of jokes in themselves. Like people should, we could do a whole podcast just analyzing your lyrics to the songs, because some of them, I people like, some of them are deep cuts. This one particularly not so, maybe not. I don't know, maybe I missed some of it, but for those that didn't hear the lyrics, it does say at one point, we're about to read the book that no one ever finishes.
Right.
Which is true. This is Orthodoxy. This is Chesterton's master work, or at least the most read work. I prefer Everlasting Man, but this is his most popular work, and it is infamously the one that a lot of people do not finish the first time they read it.
Right. Yeah, Chesterton's that guy. Like, he's got these great quotes, but so few people might make it through his books, and that was why I originally made my book Chesterton's Gateway. It's because I learned through reading Chesterton that his essays are really where it's at, where you really get into him in bite-sized chunks. But I started with heretics because I'm such like when you find out something's a sequel, I found out Orthodoxy was a sequel to heretics.
So you felt like you had to read the original first.
Yeah, I wanted to read this. So I did. And I would say, having done that, you don't need to at all.
Right.
But I did. In fact, he's going to talk about that here.
Why not? Why don't you need to? Oh, you want to say why you don't need to after
showing into that? We'll let him do is because he has a preface. So this episode will purely be an introduction to Orthodoxy. And for those who don't know, this is Chesterton's Gateway, the podcast. It's a little confusing. There's a book, an audiobook, a podcast, and there is a band. If you go on audio, you'll find all the music that I create for this podcast under the band Chesterton's Gateway. My book, Chesterton's Gateway, is a collection of Chesterton essays that I recommend as kind of the gateway into Chesterton. And that was what we went through first in this podcast series. So we're on episode, I think, 19, maybe?
Sounds right. Yep.
And we skipped over the Orthodoxy chapters because we knew that next we were going to do the full book of Orthodoxy. So that's where we're at. We are now diving into a real Chesterton book with big, long chapters. I remember when I did the audiobook for these chapters in Chesterton's Gateway, most of them took around an hour to read. So these are going to be broken up. Some of them are up to 5 episodes apiece. But this is going to be the deepest dive into Orthodoxy I think anybody's ever done on a podcast that I know of. I mean, it's like in detail. We will have, and by the time you're done, you'll have basically the audiobook and commentary. Because we're going to have Chesterton read every word of it to us in his AI voice, which is his real voice with AI.
Which is one of the coolest parts of this. But it doesn't support Ethan the way it should. So you all should go out and buy Chesterton's Gateway, the book, because that's the one that makes the most difference. But you can also enjoy
or join our Patreon. Our Patreon is it's very helpful to join our Patreon.
We love our Patreon.
In fact, that's another thing we're doing on this with this book. I created a doc, and I've shared the document with our Patreon subscribers, so they can actually go through and leave comments and things. I saw you're even interacting with the guys on the comments in the doc. So you can interact with us through the book, make notes. So if you got your notes, you can answer them on the show if you're part of the Patreon. So with that, let's so what are we reading today, GK?
Preface and Introduction from the book Orthodoxy, published in 1908.
Or is there anything else you want to say about Orthodoxy before we give his preface here?
Well, this was what really put him on the map. He was a journalist for a while and writing. He was writing newspapers articles as well as books like Heretics. But this was the one that really put him on the map. And it's interesting to me that that's the case because, he's a commentator on big things usually. But this is and he gets into big things in this book. But ultimately, this book is a very personal book where he's telling you what his reasons were for being a Christian.
Right. Yeah, that's the first big thing to really understand about Orthodoxy, which I think he'll get into here because he's going to explain it. But that this is him, as opposed to, I think, which I took it as this is his Mere Christianity, because I loved Mere Christianity when I first read it, and I was like, wow, this is amazing apologetic writing, making these great arguments. Chesterton is making arguments, but he's also, his main key point is he's explaining how he's come to believe.
Exactly.
And it's not relative. He's also not relative thing. Well, this is my way. That's, you have your way to some extent. I mean, he's saying, maybe, but he's giving why it's reasonable to him by also sharing how he reasons.
Which is also very clever too. He's not pretending to be the ultimate logical Christian apologist, answering all the questions about everything. He's just saying, hey, he's making it personal and accessible. This is how I came to it. Now, if one were to pick up a random chapter and read it, of Orthodoxy, you would not understand that that's what he's doing, because he gets into some really cool concepts about human nature and about wonder and about the interaction with ideas. There's no breakdown of the Apostles' Creed or anything like that, although he does mention the Apostles' Creed once in the beginning. But that's it. And the rest of it is a book which is kind of whimsical in its approach, but it does make the argument in a very kind of enticing argument, like a fun argument for why it might be a reasonable thing, a fun thing to be a Christian.
Yeah, and has so many. He comes at it from so many different ways than other Christians usually do.
Yep.
He's kind of daring in his choice of arguments. I never would have thought to make some of the arguments he makes. He's not afraid to be a little bit. I don't know. We'll see as we get into it. But let's read his first. This is the preface, and then there will be introduction is longer. The preface is just one short paragraph. So let's do the preface.
Let's do it.
This book is meant to be a companion to Heretics and to put the positive side in addition to the negative. Many critics complained of the book called Heretics because it merely criticized current philosophies without offering any alternative philosophy. This book is an attempt to answer the challenge. It is unavoidably affirmative and therefore unavoidably autobiographical. The writer has been driven back upon somewhat the same difficulty as that which beset Newman in writing his Apologia. He has been forced to be egotistical only in order to be sincere. While everything else may be different, the motive in both cases is the same. It is the purpose of the writer to attempt an explanation, not of whether the Christian faith can be believed, but of how he personally has come to believe it. The book is therefore arranged upon the positive principle of a riddle and its answer. It deals first with all the writer's own solitary and sincere speculations, and then with all the startling style in which they were all suddenly satisfied by the Christian theology. The writer regards it as amounting to a convincing creed. But if it is not that, it is at least a repeated and surprising coincidence.
So, who's Newman in his Apologia?
Right. So the one historical note from this, besides the note that you mentioned at the beginning, that this was a response to the book Heretics that he wrote. And Heretics, by the way, just for those that haven't read it,
explain that. Yeah,
Heretics is a book where he goes through and he identifies a number of essentially wrong ideas that have taken root in the Western world, English society. And
he covered a Heretics essay in Gateway, right?
Yes, I think.
Family, in defense of the family.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so he attacks some bad ideas, sometimes attached to particular people and sometimes not. But basically it's a list. It's a book that just chapter by chapter, each chapter attacks a different bad idea. And he's going to explain to us in the introduction coming up why that led to this book. But in the meantime, this preface references the fact that he's going to basically be talking about himself and his own beliefs quite a bit. And he references Cardinal John Henry Newman, as he puts it, Newman. And Newman was a man that had lived in the 19th century. So he died when Chesterton was young, was very young, and at 1890. And but he famously had been this brilliant, he was actually a Presbyterian and Calvinist preacher first, and then he shifted towards high church Anglicanism, and then eventually converted to Catholicism, which was a big no-no in English society. And he was, like nowadays, what happened to John Henry Newman was essentially what we would call being canceled nowadays. He lost his jobs, he lost sources of income, he was attacked publicly in the press, he was attacked academically, his credentials were threatened, because he had a number of degrees. And so he, at one point later in his life, wrote this book called the Apologia pro vita sua, which is just Latin. That just means a defense of one's life, or this man's life, and explaining why he converted to Catholicism and how his journey went, like the whole progress of his journey. So Chesterton's comparing himself to Newman. Newman was also the guy that gave a very powerful explanation of how Christian doctrine develops over the ages, and that it's actually reasonable and right that it would develop over the ages. So anyway, Newman was a towering figure in the Catholic world, English Catholic world, and so Chesterton was very familiar with it by this point.
He probably got canceled by Jerry Seinfeld.
For using Latin too much.
He just hated Newman.
Oh, sorry,
Newman.
Wow, yeah, that missed me. I missed it.
Sorry, yeah, people that haven't watched that are not going to get that joke at all.
If it was an airplane, it would have
old man joke in the head at this point. It feels, yeah, I understand, like, when my dad and, like, people that make these jokes that in their mind, everybody gets them. I'm realizing that's like, I'm making a joke from the 90s right now. Okay.
Yeah, you think that's bad? I make jokes from the Middle Ages.
The 14th.
Nobody laughs. No one understands.
All right, we're now going to read
Introduction. In defense of everything else, the only possible excuse for this book is that it is an answer to a challenge. Even a bad shot is dignified when he accepts a duel. When some time ago I published a series of hasty but sincere papers under the name of Heretics, several critics for whose intellect I have a warm respect, I may mention specially Mr. G.S. Street, said that it was all very well for me to tell everybody to affirm his cosmic theory, but that I had carefully avoided supporting my precepts with example. I will begin to worry about my philosophy, said Mr. Street, when Mr. Chesterton has given us his. It was perhaps an incautious suggestion to make to a person only too ready to write books upon the feeblest provocation. But after all, though Mr. Street has inspired and created this book, he need not read it. If he does read it, he will find that in its pages I have attempted in a vague and personal way, in a set of mental pictures rather than in a series of deductions, to state the philosophy in which I have come to believe. I will not call it my philosophy, for I did not make it. God and humanity made it, and it made me.
Yeah, that's key right there when he says, I've attempted a vague and personal way in a set of mental pictures rather than in a series of deductions, because we so want to make it a series of deductions. It really is a set of mental pictures.
Right. He's much more, Chesterton is much more imaginative and whimsical than your typical. He's immensely intelligent, but he's not your typical apologist who's going to give a logical syllogism for why X or Y is the truth. And the Mr. G.S. Street that he's talking about in this paragraph, who is apparently the guy that we have to thank.
It sounds like it kind of sounds like a boy band name.
G.S. Street, like the Backstreet Boys. Well, his name, as funny, his middle name is Slythe, George Slythe Street. Wow. So he's the original House Slytherin, I guess. Slythe. See, there you go. There's my Harry Potter reference for the nerd. Yep, nerd. So he's a critic. He's a member of this class of Englishmen in the late 1800s and early 1900s that is totally against basically fancy people, basically overeducated, decadents, as he would call them. He was part of this movement called the counter decadent movement in England. And G.S. Street was known for his
more street.
Exactly. He's from the hood.
Wears street clothes. Yeah. Okay.
He's all about taking down the people that are highfalutin, and he's for this brand of British attitude, which is very pragmatic. And so he was known as he was a journalist. He was a critic. He actually died the same year that Chesterton did. He almost the exact same lifespan. He died in 1936. So anyway, so we have a member of House Slytherin to thank for this book being written, because he challenges Chesterton to write about his own philosophy, which Chesterton says he's going to do, as you pointed out, in a series of mental pictures, not deductions.
Yes.
And that's going to be the challenge. Each of these chapters that we read through, I want to ask at the end of it, what are the mental pictures that he's presenting to us, to help us understand whatever concept, whatever belief or step that he himself took on his path to Christianity.
Yeah, and I think, that's so what he says right after that is also very key, because I think your typical person would say, I'm going to tell you what I view and my belief in a set of mental pictures, and they would say, this is my philosophy. This is what I've come up with. He says at the end of this, very emphatically, I will not call it my philosophy, for I did not make it. God and humanity made it, and it made me. So he's still saying this is a thing that came from outside me, that has happened to me, that I've experienced. So he's not saying this is my personal experience, or this is my.
Well, it's not of my making. It's not of my
or
making.
not making. Like I'm trying. What's the postmodern way? Like, we each have our own. I'm blanking out on the Babylon Bee headline fodder.
Like self-actualization or identity, or something else.
Your truth, my truth, that thing.
Oh,
that
right,
kind of thing.
right.
That's it.
It's not subjectivist.
Yes.
And it is, but for him, what we'll find is a very particular form of this, where along the way he gives hints that he had hoped that he was inventing or discovering a new thing. He was kind of trying to be an originalist and say, well, everyone else says this, but everyone else says X. I say Y for all these reasons. And then he turns around and finds out that Y is what's being said by Christianity. It's like, well, all right. And he goes on to the next thing. Well, I say Z, but it turns out Christianity also said Z. And so he's going to discover along the way.
Yeah, that's this paragraph right here.
Yep.
Jump into it.
I have often had a fancy for writing a romance about an English yachtsman who slightly miscalculated his course and discovered England under the impression that it was a new island in the South Seas. I always find, however, that I am either too busy or too lazy to write this fine work, so I may as well give it away for the purposes of philosophical illustration. There will probably be a general impression that the man who landed armed to the teeth and talking by signs, to plant the British flag on that barbaric temple, which turned out to be the pavilion at Brighton, felt rather a fool. I'm not here concerned to deny that he looked a fool, but if you imagine that he felt a fool, or at any rate that the sense of folly was his sole or his dominant emotion, then you have not studied with sufficient delicacy the rich romantic nature of the hero of this tale. His mistake was really a most enviable mistake, and he knew it if he was the man I take him for. What could be more delightful than to have in the same few minutes all the fascinating terrors of going abroad, combined with all the humane security of coming home again? What could be better than to have all the fun of discovering South Africa without the disgusting necessity of landing there? What could be more glorious than to brace oneself up to discover New South Wales, and then realize, with a gush of happy tears, that it was really old South Wales? This at least seems to me the main problem for philosophers, and is in a manner the main problem of this book. How can we contrive to be at once astonished at the world and yet at home in it? How can this queer cosmic town, with its many-legged citizens, with its monstrous and ancient lamps, how can this world give us at once the fascination of a strange town and the comfort and honour of being our own town?
Now he said he was saving this. I don't care where the order of books, if Ball and the Cross was first or after. I'm thinking after, but
I think it's after. But
he uses the boat thing in Ball and the Cross. These two guys in the Ball and the Cross, they're fighting to have a duel to the death over the existence of God, basically, or they both have offended each other's view, the Catholic guy and the atheist guy, and all of society is trying to stop their duel, and they're running together to try to kill each other. But there's one part where they get into a shipwreck and they crash land, and they think that they've crash landed on I can't remember, they think they've crash landed on like a lost island or something, and they find out that they've just crash landed right on England's shore. So he does use it later.
1 year later, it turns out. I just looked it up. Oh. It's Ball and the Cross was published 1 year in 1909, 1 year after Heretics. So obviously the idea was on his mind. Right. I like how he's admitting full bore that, it would be the disgusting necessity of landing in South Africa is something he doesn't aim at. So he's a homebody, and it's basically kind of joke about his laziness or his desire not to do much, which was a thing that Chesterton's really one of those men that easily pokes fun at himself. He pokes fun at other people too, but he also pokes fun at himself, which to my mind is the mark of a mature comedian, or at least a person that uses humor maturely, because you can laugh at yourself as well as at others.
Right.
And so he's pointing out that he has this deep love of home and not leaving. And then he also has a deep love of being overwhelmed with a sense of wonder at the newness of things. And so he gives us the line straight at the end. How can this queer cosmic town with its many-legged citizens, with its monstrous and ancient lamps, how can this world give us at once the fascination of a strange town, the comfort and honor of being our own town? So he's going to return to this over and over again.
Yeah, that's a very key theme. All right, we'll keep going.
To show that a faith or a philosophy is true from every standpoint would be too big an undertaking even for a much bigger book than this. It is necessary to follow one path of argument, and this is the path that I here propose to follow. I wish to set forth my faith as particularly answering this double spiritual need, the need for that mixture of the familiar and the unfamiliar, which Christendom has rightly named romance. For the very word romance has in it the mystery and ancient meaning of Rome. Anyone setting out to dispute anything ought always to begin by saying what he does not dispute. Beyond stating what he proposes to prove, he should always state what he doesn't propose to prove. The thing I do not propose to prove, the thing I propose to take as common ground between myself and any average reader, is this desirability of an active and imaginative life, picturesque and full of a poetical curiosity, a life such as Western man at any rate always seems to have desired. If a man says that extinction is better than existence, or blank existence better than variety and adventure, then he is not one of the ordinary people to whom I am talking. If a man prefers nothing, I can give him nothing. But nearly all people I have ever met in this Western society in which I live would agree to the general proposition that we need this life of practical romance. The combination of something that is strange with something that is secure. We need so to view the world as to combine an idea of wonder and an idea of welcome. We need to be happy in this wonderland without once being merely comfortable. It is this achievement of my creed that I shall chiefly pursue in these pages.
And I love that he's going to build an argument, or his big point he's going to make is going to be off the idea of romance, which I feel like your typical Darwinian or naturalist, they completely take that kind of thing for granted. They just think, oh yeah, well, we can explain that away. It's chemicals, whatever. Yeah. It just doesn't fit into their worldview.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just worse than for granted.
So it just gets tossed with, baby with the bathwater kind of thing.
Yep.
In so many worldviews, which we're going to talk about in the first chapter. He does it very
cleverly, by the way. This is an ancient and an enlightenment. The Enlightenment rekindled this way of writing. So whenever anyone set up to write something serious, they would always say in the beginning, here's the question I'm going to answer. And then here's the things that I'm not going to dispute. I'm just going to take for granted. Chesterton is very clever with this. And this begins the sentence in the middle of this paragraph, closer to the beginning, though. Anyone setting out to dispute anything ought to always begin by saying what he does not dispute. So it's this ancient philosophical idea of, here are my premises. I'm just taking these premises as true. And then I'm going to argue from these. But then what he does is he gives you a premise which, to my mind, almost no one, I definitely never thought of it that way. I do think it's true, but it's not. He calls it common ground, but it's very interesting because did you ever say that? Did you ever think to yourself that a life, a desirability of an active and imaginative life, picturesque and full of poetical curiosity, is always desired? I never thought of that that way. That we need a life of practical romance. Like no one thinks of it, but not no one. I'm sure there are better people than me that think of it that way. But I never really thought of that until I read Chesterton. I go, well, yeah, that's right. People aren't happy with, like you said, the Darwinian, purely mechanistic. It's just unsatisfying. You need some romance in your view of the world. You can be practical, but you need to be romantic as well. You need to have this poetical curiosity, this desire for the imaginative life. Now, you're an artist, so, I mean, you do that naturally. This imaginative curiosity that you explore, you work. But, I don't know, did you ever think of it this way and think, like, yeah, everybody has a desire for this kind of reality, this life of practical romance? Is that something that you ever thought of before reading this?
I mean, I don't know. I've immersed myself in like C.S. Lewis and various authors and Chesterton for so long. It's hard for me to remember.
So maybe
I think to some extent I've thought about, kind of like he says at the end there, that he sought a creed that made him happy without making him merely comfortable. And he believes that's the true desire of men, like to not just be comfortable.
Yeah.
Because why do we tell stories about conflict and about things going wrong and overcoming things? And like, there's a huge part of, I mean, it's something you think about when you write stories. Like why putting a story in this order of events works as a story, but other orders of events don't work.
That's right.
There's something that speaks to our soul as a story and some things that don't. It's such a huge thing to humans. And there's an implication there. If that's a real thing, if like story, romance, love, good, evil, these non-physical things are real, it implies that there's something beyond reality, an author of those things.
Right. But at the same time, he's never going to let go of the idea that welcome needs to be a part of it too. The home is still a part, but you just need to have this practical romance. You need to have a
Right.
meeting of the whole welcome of home.
Yeah, and he gets into the home is romantic. These things.
That's right.
Are romantic.
That's true, and that comes up in a lot of. I remember recently when we were Chestertonians, we read the book on the innocent. What's the guy's name?
Innocent Smith,
something like that. Anyway, the guy that's put on trial for all these crimes that he commits.
Yeah. Man alive.
It turns out that what he's doing is he's injecting this Chestertonian sense of wonder into his own life, and he hasn't actually done anything wrong.
Yeah, he robbed his own house and stuff. Yeah,
right. He robs his own house.
To go over it.
He runs off with other women, but it turns out it's his own wife that they've set up.
Yeah, he keeps
as a kind of
kidnapping his own wife,
where he kidnaps his own wife over and over again, and things like that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a good Chesterton novel. It's a nice short one.
Yep.
All right, let's continue on.
But I have a peculiar reason for mentioning the man in a yacht who discovered England, for I am that man in a yacht. I discovered England. I do not see how this book can avoid being egotistical, and I do not quite see, to tell the truth, how it can avoid being dull. Dullness will, however, free me from the charge which I most lament, the charge of being flippant. Mere light sophistry is the thing that I happen to despise most of all things. And it is perhaps a wholesome fact that this is the thing of which I am generally accused. I know nothing so contemptible as a mere paradox, a mere ingenious defense of the indefensible. If it were true, as has been said, that Mr. Bernard Shaw lived upon paradox, then he ought to be a mere common millionaire, for a man of his mental activity could invent a sophistry every 6 minutes. It is as easy as lying, because it is lying. The truth is, of course, that Mr. Shaw is cruelly hampered by the fact that he cannot tell any lie unless he thinks it is the truth. I find myself under the same intolerable bondage. I never in my life said anything merely because I thought it funny, though, of course, I have had ordinary human vainglory, and may have thought it funny because I had said it. It is one thing to describe an interview with a gorgon or a griffin, a creature who does not exist. It is another thing to discover that the rhinoceros does exist, and then take pleasure in the fact that he looks as if he didn't. One searches for truth, but it may be that one pursues instinctively the more extraordinary truths. And I offer this book with the heartiest sentiments to all the jolly people who hate what I write and regard it very justly, for all I know, as a piece of poor clowning or a single tiresome joke.
This is a wonderful paragraph. Most of the paragraph is just about how Chesterton doesn't like to be taken lightly. Mm-hmm. The question comes up: why do you think he was taken lightly? And invariably, I think the answer is that he has such wit, and he makes so many jokes, and he teases people so often while he's making deep philosophical points.
Right.
That there are, frankly, a lot of people that, because of their irritation at being made fun of, or their beliefs being made fun of, or their lack of intelligence, to be frank, that they don't see that he's making a serious point, and so they accuse him of being flippant. And so we see that he does. But at the same time that he's telling us, look, I'm not flippant. I don't actually like paradox, even though that's one of the things that GK Chesterton is often accused of, is using paradox as a tool in argumentation. He actually uses deep contrast, not paradox, because paradox in its essence makes no sense. But the examples that Chesterton uses do make sense. They're just deep contrasts. But nevertheless, he's accused of sophistry, which is this. Sophistry it's one of the oldest arts in philosophy. It's the degradation of philosophy. Plato railed against the sophists, who were the ones that invented sophistry. And sophistry is saying a lot of things that sound intelligent to convince people of something that isn't true. So that's what he doesn't want to be accused of.
So I'm trying to understand, is there any example of what that would be today, or is that just something that in that time, philosophy and this kind of, it was just such a big thing at the time of?
No, I mean, there's a lot of it. I mean, look, I'm going to be go on dangerous ground here, but if you listen to political pundits, especially highly intelligent political pundits, if you listen to, so I'm a Christian, so I think that when I listen to some of the Richard Dawkins. Sorry, is it Christopher Dawkins? Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins. When I listen to Richard Dawkins, and I go through the arguments he's making, many of the arguments, especially his criticisms of Christianity, are sophistical arguments. They sound intelligent, but they don't actually make sense when you dig into the premises. And so he's trying to use intelligent sounding language to say something which I believe is false. So I do think sophistry, you listen to political pundits, they use sophistry all the time. They try to sound really clear and fancy, or really they sometimes inject a lot of passion into what they do, and we're supposed to be convinced by that. But yeah, they're using sophistry to convince people of the wrong things, which is instead of using valid arguments.
But they wouldn't say they are, right? They would say they think they're right.
Yeah,
right?
If they were. Yeah, of course they never would admit it. Nobody wants to admit to be a sophist.
So even the sophists of the time where the term comes from, is that a slur back then? It wasn't like an actual okay.
Yeah,
so it's always been
slur,
like an insulting idea to be a sophist. Yep. Okay.
People that are using the appearance of wisdom to argue for what they want and give themselves a job. Actually, they also saw themselves as kind of entertainers, mental entertainers, and so but they expected to be paid, and that was what ticked off Plato quite a bit. Was the idea that people should just pay them for saying things that sound intelligent but were wrong.
Okay, we'll continue on.
For if this book is a joke, it is a joke against me. I am the man who with the utmost daring discovered what had been discovered before. If there is an element of farce in what follows, the farce is at my own expense. For this book explains how I fancied I was the first to set foot in Brighton, and then found I was the last. It recounts my elephantine adventures in pursuit of the obvious. No one can think my case more ludicrous than I think it myself. No reader can accuse me here of trying to make a fool of him. I am the fool of this story, and no rebel shall hurl me from my throne. I freely confess all the idiotic ambitions of the end of the 19th century. I did, like all other solemn little boys, tried to be in advance of the age. Like them, I tried to be some 10 minutes in advance of the truth, and I found that I was 1,800 years behind it. I did strain my voice with a painfully juvenile exaggeration in uttering my truths, and I was punished in the fittest and funniest way, for I have kept my truths, but I have discovered not that they were not truths, but simply that they were not mine. When I fancied that I stood alone, I was really in the ridiculous position of being backed up by all Christendom. It may be, heaven forgive me, that I did try to be original, but I only succeeded in inventing all by myself an inferior copy of the existing traditions of civilized religion. The man from the yacht thought he was the first to find England. I thought I was the first to find Europe. I did try to found a heresy of my own, and when I had put the last touches to it, I discovered that it was Orthodoxy.
Yeah. This is. I mean, what I like about this is he mentions. I freely confess all the idiotic ambitions of the end of the 19th century. I did, like all other solemn little boys, try to be in advance of the age. So he's talking about the rise of progressivism and this idea that history is always evolving and growing. And so that what that means, if you start to swallow the progressive principles, is that the next new truth is always there to be discovered. So if you could just be ahead of the curve and discover it 10 minutes before everyone else, you could be an influencer. Sorry, that's this century instead of last century. But that's the point, is that you can be the one that gets the attention for having the truth. And of course, in classic Chesterton style, that entire paragraph was a takedown of himself. And it makes it very hard to argue against a person that is willing to take himself so lightly and point out that he was the fool in this. And that's one of the very clever rhetorical devices that Chesterton uses. And he doesn't use it disingenuously. He really means it. He thinks, like, I was I was silly. I thought I could outthink and come to new truth ahead of everybody else. And it turns out when I did discover truth, it was one that had been around for a lot of centuries before.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that captivates me the most about Chesterton is his ability to both be really jolly and funny and hilarious and be talking about very serious, very deep things. And there's sort of a way in which you feel, as a reader, you feel honored by him to be given both of those things, to be given to be, and it's a way that I wish I hope I could treat people and make them feel like that I am the kind of guy who talks about it, trusts them enough to talk about the deeper things, but also can keep things light. He's such a balance of heavy and light.
and you feel a balance of heavy and light, and you feel almost like you're Chesterton's friend. Like he writes in a way where you feel included in the conversation he's having. He's a man of unbelievable intelligence, far greater than most people I've ever met, and definitely more than myself. But you feel like he's inviting you into a conversation that you can access.
You don't feel dwarfed by his intelligence.
Exactly. You would definitely feel dwarfed by his physical frame, but not by his. But he doesn't make you feel dwarfed by his intellect.
I've been the same weight before.
I'm getting there.
Yeah.
It may be that somebody will be entertained by the account of this happy fiasco. It might amuse a friend or an enemy to read how I gradually learned from the truth of some stray legend, or from the falsehood of some dominant philosophy, things that I might have learnt from my catechism if I had ever learnt it. There may or may not be some entertainment in reading how I found, at last in an anarchist club or a Babylonian temple, what I might have found in the nearest parish church. If anyone is entertained by learning how the flowers of the field, or the phrases in an omnibus, the accidents of politics or the pains of youth came together in a certain order to produce a certain conviction of Christian orthodoxy, he may possibly read this book. But there is in everything a reasonable division of labor. I have written the book, and nothing on earth would induce me to read it.
Wouldn't read it.
which is that's just classic English or British attitude right there. Is like they write these you write a great work, you're supposed to be very, very humble. And it was the men of his time, and Chesterton is probably one of the kind of examples who put that on the map. That idea on the map is that you should hold your own work really lightly. What I heard from my thesis advisor when I was working on my master's was, at the end of finishing your master's, you should be happy with the accomplishment, and you should never wish your worst enemy to have to read it. So it's this is Chesterton in his version of that, which is I love it. I've written the book, and nothing on earth would induce me to read it, which is awesome.
All right, let's read this last paragraph.
I add one purely pedantic note, which comes as a note naturally should at the beginning of the book. These essays are concerned only to discuss the actual fact that the central Christian theology, sufficiently summarized in the Apostles' Creed, is the best root of energy and sound ethics. They are not intended to discuss the very fascinating but quite different question of what is the present seat of authority for the proclamation of that creed. When the word orthodoxy is used here, it means the Apostles' Creed, as understood by everybody calling himself Christian until a very short time ago, and the general historic conduct of those who held such a creed. I have been forced by mere space to confine myself to what I have got from this creed. I do not touch the matter much disputed among modern Christians of where we ourselves got it. This is not an ecclesiastical treatise, but a sort of slovenly autobiography. But if anyone wants my opinions about the actual nature of the authority, Mr. G.S. Street has only to throw me another challenge, and I will write him another book.
which to the best of my knowledge, G.S. Street never did.
Yeah.
He did criticize Chesterton a couple other places, but he never challenged him to write a book, another book about that. So sadly, we do not get Chesterton's analysis of the Apostles' Creed later.
Well, I do have Chesterton reading the Apostles' Creed for review for those of us who don't have it memorized. I know you do.
I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. I believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit and born of the Virgin Mary. He suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended to hell. The third day he rose again from the dead. He ascended to heaven and is seated at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From there he will come to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen.
Beautiful.
Yep. And he will never say that in his book. He will never go through the sentences of the creed. But because, as he says, he's giving us his personal story of how he got to the truths that are held by the Christian creed. Although he doesn't talk specifically about Christ in so much detail. The creed, obviously, as we just heard, lays out the primary pillars of Christianity, which are belief in God as a creator, God the Father as creator of heaven and earth, in a Trinity, mentions both Christ and the Holy Spirit, in the story of Christ, why he came to the earth, what happened to him when he did, and then the final judgment, and the various aspects of the Church of Christ, communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of body, and life everlasting. So
I was always fascinated in these creeds that of all the many people in Christ's life that impacted him, why does Pontius Pilate get a shout out? It seems like why him? Well, because he was kind of like, hey, I don't think I should kill him, but I guess if you guys want to kill him, fine. Wasn't that his attitude?
Yes, kind of. Pontius Pilate, well, so there's kind of two aspects to that. It's a really good point and question. And the reason historically, my understanding is, by the way, just to be clear, I'm not an ancient scripture scholar. I'm a medieval scholar, but not an ancient scripture one. But anyway, the mention of Pontius Pilate is there to show that it was the greatest empire in the world at the time that put him to death. He was opposed by the great, Pontius Pilate was a representative of Rome. He was the ruler of Palestine, that area, as a representative of Rome. Now, to answer your other question about what Pontius Pilate, why does he get the bad press? What's interesting about Pontius Pilate is he was an immensely practical man. He knew principles of good and evil, and he basically bowed to pragmatism over his principles. He knew that Christ was he knew Christ was innocent, and he nevertheless had him tortured and then had him executed. And it was he that did it. The Jews didn't have the power to execute anyone legally. It had to be the Roman governor. And so he was, and his final line, famous line, well, I guess it's not his final line because he does have a retort against the Jewish elders after Christ dies on the cross. But his final line in the trial of Christ is that he washes himself of his guilt. And he says, but he says to Jesus, truth, what is that? So he's viewed as the ultimate subjectivist. Is like, in the end, in order to survive, because he's afraid of the Jewish mob, he's going to abandon his principles and then claim he doesn't even know what truth is, and then try to wash his hands literally of the whole affair. And even though he's the one that's actually putting Christ to death. So he's a fascinating figure. And I've always thought someone should make a really good movie about the life about Pontius Pilate. Like, he would make a really dramatic, it would make a really dramatic movie because he's a fascinating character. Anyway, that's not Chesterton. That's the Apostles' Creed.
Yeah, well.
And the end of the introduction, right?
Yeah. So we are going to be diving in headfirst into the Maniac next week. Till then. That's right. Buckle those Chester belts.
Because you're about to read a book.
So
Orthodoxy,
cool.
Orthodox. Sometimes they don't pronounce it right.
Maybe it rhymes better. Who knows?
You just say gibberish here. Sometimes it's funny.
Well, isn't he saying everybody orthodoxy?
Yeah, everybody Orthodoxy tonight. A lot of these, I just take the lyrics from a different song and change it. So this is Backstreet's Back.
Yeah,
Everybody.
It's one of the classic.
Yeah.
You know, I always thought it was hilarious, that song, because like a boy band, they made ridiculous amounts of money on a song that they're back again. They never left.
Yeah, that's the first song I ever heard of from them. Yeah.
They were always there. They're not back. But who am I to argue with the scads of money they made on it?
Chesterton's Gateway is produced by Ethan Nicolle and Michael Grumbine. It is based on the book of the same name, which can be found on that capitalist monstrosity Amazon.com. Send questions and comments to chestertonsgateway@gmail.com. And join us on Patreon, where only the true Chestertonians can be found. Goodbye.
They did the piano playing and then shit their head. That's great. That's awesome.
Okay.